Showtime! The Capital G Show starts right now.
What's up YouTube, Capital G here. So guys, remember yesterday when I was talking about how if you played against a really aggressive opponent, they could basically say screw it and they could try and push through cards like appropriate using their reckless greeds and their upstart goblins because they basically knew that they were going for game, and how this is very similar to what many people refer to as the Max C challenge. You know, that's obviously where you max C your opponent and they just say, well, I don't care, I'm just going to keep special summoning because if I can push through for game, it doesn't really matter how many cards you have in your hand. Well, I've been thinking about that and how many decks right now won't stop because if they see a clear path to winning the game, again, it doesn't really matter how much advantage you appear to be gaining. In fact, many times this format, if a Dragon Ruler player max sees me, I'm just like, well, you've got Dragon's Ravine on the field, so fuck it, I'm going for game. You know what I mean? And a lot of people are probably thinking that, you know, this is just limited to Dragon Rulers, but when you really look around as far as what's been topping regionals and stuff, you'll realize that we have a lot of parity in the game right now. Like, there's a lot of diversity in this format, so it's more than just your predictable Dragon Rulers, and, you know, maybe that goes double for this deck because they run Return, and that in itself is just an OTK card, but you also have other high-powered offensive decks, such as Girgia Karakuri, or I mean, really any Karakuri version. You also have Heretics as usual. You can even throw Blackwings into the discussion because, you know, anytime that you're looking at double or triple Whirlwind, that means that you're going to be stacking multiple Boras and Kalutes. And with Blackwings, and if people have seen me I do this a lot. I mean, you really only have to get to 7,200 because 98% of the time you can make Cowboy in main phase 2. So because of this and how the format seems to be a little more aggressive than it was about, maybe 3 weeks ago, and how people can just flip over double Reckless and be like, alright, I'm going in. You know, I've actually been thinking about the idea of going against the grain and teching in some copies of either Swift Scarecrow or Battle Faders in the side deck for these situations. And I want to know if maybe I'm on to something or if I'm just completely reaching on this. Because when I look at this format and how Gores is maybe not the most viable card right now, because nearly every single deck in this format that's like really popular has a key spell that it wants to keep face up for pretty much the whole game, whether that be Black Whirlwind or Dragon's Ravine or Spellbook Tower. You know, Gores is usually just not a threat. I mean, if your opponent has Ravine on the board, I feel great about throwing everything that I have in attack mode and just going for it. I also have to say that ever since Dragon Rulers came out, I mean, I just think that Tragodia has been collateral damage because in main phase 2, you just know they're either going to snatch steal it with Big Eye or they're going to pop it with Dragosack. So I just think because of the dragons, I think that they have killed all playability that Tragodia could ever wish for. But back to Battle Fader and Swift Scarecrow. You know, I feel like not only they could save games, and obviously that would be at the cost of being pretty dead in the early game, but usually when your opponent goes for like that game-ending push and you counter it, you know, their field is like a jumbled mess because, you know, they're looking to maximize damage, or, you know, you have a card like Dark Hole which just completely torches them because not a lot of times do people go for OTKs and then make like a Stardust. Like, that would be kind of random. I mean, you obviously have the Dracosack option there, but that's just one specific deck that can make that. If they're under Max C and they tried to push in very hard, then obviously you're in a great position because what I've realized is when I'm playing Blackwings, almost all of my biggest push comes from, you know, my opponent stupidly giving me tons and tons of cards, and sure enough, I draw into multiple Kalutes or I draw into multiple Whirlwinds, and then it just becomes as simple as mimicking what they just tried to do to me last turn. So I guess the main reason I bring this up is because with so many good cards like Blaster and Royal Decree and Trap Stun and Giant Wing Beat, it's really hard to go into these games with these really aggressive decks and hope that your defense can hold up the entire game. You know, expecting you to have the Solemn Warning and the Evacs and the Bottomlesses and the Book of Moons for, you know, 8 and 7 consecutive turns, that's really asking a lot of your deck. I mean, most people will obviously just say, well, why don't you just OTK them first because they don't run much defense, but it's easier said than done. Take, for example, if you're playing a deck like Bujins, you know, that's a deck that is based around protecting one monster and that monster basically being able to net you advantage the longer it stays on the field. well, you just can't expect your deck to turn into an offensive juggernaut just because you need it in a certain situation or game. I mean, that kind of reminds me how last year the Miami Heat expected Chris Bosh to play center and do it effectively, even though his natural position is power forward. So when he got, wrecked by Roy Hibbert, it wasn't really a shock. I mean, you can't really expect your deck to just turn on the offense when that's not really what your deck is catered to. So when people are always like, oh, capital G, well, if they have Royal Decree up, that means you can OTK them. I mean, that's cool, but if I'm playing Constellars, OTKing is just not what the deck does. You can't just make your deck turn into something it's not. A deck like Black Wings just happens to have those options, but many decks don't. So I just want to know what you guys think on this. Do you think that these cards are legitimate? Because it seems to be either you're just going to expect your defense to hold up for the entire game, knowing that your opponent is probably going to side for these lockdown and these defensive cards, or you can potentially run these cards like Battle Fader and Scarecrow at the cost of them being a little dead in the early game. But if you happen to draw them off Max C, then I mean you're in a huge position, because again, I don't feel like Gores and Tragodia are really viable right now. So let me know what you guys think. Thank you for watching as always, and take care. Subscribing makes life happy.